it's the rightly ordered life, right? Your
Mm.
loves need to be ordered. That you're everything you're trying to honor God first, then you're trying to love your neighbor, and then you're also taking care of yourself, and it's and your
Mhm.
family in proper order. And if you're doing those in proper order, then it's going to look different for different people.
Welcome to the broadcast. This is Michael Easley in Context, and it's my blessing today to have Bill and Dana Wichterman on the program. Let me give you a little bit of their individual bios, and then we'll chat about their new book coming out that I'm very excited about. Bill spent time in career law and politics. He worked in the White House under the George W. Bush administration. He is the author of Dying to Live, Finding Joy in Giving Yourself to God. Also an influential essay called The Culture Upstream from Politics. And by the way, as always, in the show notes, we have all the information about our guest, and we'll link these articles so you can go check further what we've talked about. He's the co-founder of the Wedgwood Circle and board president of Faith and Law. Bill earned his M.A. in political theory from the Catholic University of America. Dana, his wife, has spent her career in international economic development professional in the U.S., I call it USAID, is that correct? The
Yes.
U.S. Agency for International Development. She currently works for the Impact Foundation, helping Christians deploy their charitable capital for impact investing. And we're going to talk about that term in our time together. She serves on boards of, and I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, so correct me if I'm wrong, Dana, Talaton.
Yes, Talenton.
I got close. 5 Talents and Faith-Driven Movement. She is the founder of the Faith-Driven Entrepreneurial and Investor Network in Washington, D.C. She holds an M.A. in International Affairs from Columbia University. Thanks for joining the program, guys.
Yep, thanks for having us, Michael.
It's such an honor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
Oh, it's my honor. So just for our audience and friends, this is a 1-degree separation world these days. Rob Schwartzwalder, Dr. Schwartzwalder is a close mutual friend of ours, and many of the authors and folks we're going to talk about and influences in your life and my life obviously are similar. And the longer I live, it seems like we all know the same circle. It's just interesting to me. I don't know.
That's true.
Cindy and I started out our marriage. Got married in '80, and we were too afraid to go into debt. We had very, very few times we went into like a 4-year car loan we paid off in 2 years or something. We were afraid of debt. We were in the era of Ron Blue and Larry Burkett, and later Crown, and then later on Financial Peace with Dave Ramsey's interesting products, fabulous products. So we've had this sort of trajectory along the way, and your guys is similar in a lot of ways. You were influenced by a lot of these voices as well, correct?
Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, we credit Crown and Larry Burkett for having such a harmonious marriage, particularly around making decisions around money, which is often a point of conflict or frustration for couples.
Well, and I want to get to that specifically. And reading your book, by the way, the book is called Stewards Not Owners, subtitled The Joy of Aligning Your Money with Your Faith. And I don't know, did you know Sam Erickson?
We don't know.
Christian Legal Society?
Yes.
Yes.
Sam was, when I served a church in D.C., Nova, he was an elder, and he introduced me to the phrase, always steward, never owner. And so I've used that many years, and I saw the title of your new book, and I thought that's exciting because that's a way for people to get a hold of this concept at a high level that we're just stewards at best, right? We're not owners of these resources. One of the things I do want to talk to you that I didn't see in the book prominently is couples and generosity, because it's a different thing when couples are at different places, but we'll get there in a minute. You talked about in the book the influence of Crown, and I just, for the record, Cindy and I had gone through Master Your Money probably twice, FPU at least once by then, and then Crown. Crown rocked our world. It was extraordinary Bible study getting you to understand you don't own a thing.
Yeah.
This is God's way. So it's great to see that these things have influence. And what I like about your book, we're going forward with people that don't know any of the names we just talked about. They might know Financial Peace University. They might know Ramsey, but they don't know Ron Blue and Larry Burkett and Howard Dayton and some of these, interesting guys. So with that, let's talk about the book. What does it mean? What's the title of your book mean? Stewards Not Owners, the joy of aligning your money with your faith.
Well, I think, Michael, that people are longing for meaning and to know that they can have an impact in areas, that they are called to do something. We're called to make this place better while we're here. And so we can do that through our work. We can do it through loving people, but we can also do it through managing our money and both our giving and our investing. And what we show people is that you can have impact through influence with the choices you make with your money. People know that if you buy from a company that uses forced labor, you're going to have a bad impact in the world. They don't know you can invest in companies with both your regular capital or with your charitable capital that are helping companies weed out those kind of bad practices in the marketplace. So there's ways to make the marketplace redemptive, a force for good, and we're trying to show people that there's ways to have influence with both small and large amounts of your capital.
Mm-hmm. What provoked you guys to put this together?
I think our experience. The joy part is a big part, and we can talk about this. Bill starts out with being a joyful and generous person. I start out being more fearful, more security-minded, more more careful,
cautious.
and not necessarily always joyful at the beginning. But what I've found is that I grow into joy, and I think this is with any kind of obedience. Whenever you're living in harmony with God's purposes, if you do those things, they're not always pleasant at the beginning, but they become natural and pleasant and then joyful. And then you have a sense of freedom that you never could have experienced before actually doing it. But I can let Bill speak to his experience in that too.
I think we were very poor at the beginning of our marriage. I mean, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment. We couldn't afford a car. It was nice enough if you didn't mind cockroaches. And we really, we started with below zero, actually. We found out that Dana had debt that she didn't know about.
She didn't disclose that, huh?
We found out shortly after we got married. So we were below zero, and we had to work our way out of it. But right from the start, we really started inviting God into our finances. I would say it was the beginning of the journey, but I remember being very excited as seeing this as an expression of my faith in a way that I just hadn't seen it so much before that time. And that was kind of the beginning. That was 35 years ago. And it's been a journey that's continued even to the last 8 years, where we're just discovering that God cares so much about not just your charitable income, but also your investable assets, your IRAs, your 401k, your bank savings account, all of it. We have a pie chart in our book, Michael, which I love the visual because it's, it's a normal pie. It has this tiny slice, less than 1%.
I saw that.
And when you look at all of the wealth in the country and you say, here's charitable giving and here's liquid investable assets, and you're like, wow. And we're all focused on that little less than 1% slice. What about the rest of that?
Yeah. One of the times we did Crown, I handpicked some very close friends. They were all pretty influential financially. And I said, let's do this together, just a stealth group. My friend Ralph Weitz, who, by the way, Larry Burkett noticed was the first stewardship pastor in America. And Ralph was a Crown leader as well as FPU leader. And so we held it in our home. And this one woman who was extraordinarily generous lady, and she had motivated Cindy and me to start giving 20% instead of just 10%. And that was revolutionary. And I'll never forget, we were doing the Crown study, and you memorized the verse. And, I mean, she's a very successful, shrewd businesswoman, generous businesswoman. And she said, God owns it all. God owns it all. I thought giving 20% meant I get to enjoy 80%. And it's they sort of these, hit yourself on the forehead again. And I guess, number one, we all need reminding, and I'm a proponent. This isn't a guilt and shame discussion. it takes a while to get to where people are out of debt functionally. It takes a while for them to understand giving, and even your reference, Dana, about where you're giving and where you're buying from. These become, it's the long game. This isn't a weekend symposium. I'm going to figure out how to be generous, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's why the value of hearing other people's stories,
Yep.
because there's not one right way to do this. And in our book, we profile 24 current people, not saints from the past, but people
Right.
that are currently living very unique but very interesting ways to model this stewardship. And what I'd also like to say is that stewardship does not mean that God is a mean master and taskmaster that's not going to allow you to enjoy your life. He wants to you to do what you're here to do, but to enjoy that as well. So doesn't mean that if he owns it all, that we are going to live a life of misery.
Right. Well, and let me go back to, you talked about joy, Dana, because what's the reference in Hebrews? All discipline seems not for the moment to be joyful, but you endure it and you find joy. And joy, from a biblical perspective, is not Western joy. It's not happiness. Cindy and I did our year in giving a few weeks ago. We give each month to designated things, and at the year end we have a blast. It's fun because we have this pot left over that we intentionally look at, and like everybody, you get lots of requests. And we didn't even pray this year. We said, this is how much money we have. These are the people we love to give to. Who do we want to bless? And in 3 minutes, we made a decision. And I said to her just the other day, Dana and Bill, this is 2 weeks ago, I said, honey, how many Christian couples in America could do what you and I did with joy that easily? And that goes to my question, sorry for the prattle, but how do you help couples, Bill and Dana, who are at different places? You acknowledge your views, but you're all on the same page. And when you have a couple that's tight-fisted or lavishly generous, maybe irresponsibly generous, how do you help them get closer, to being balanced in their thinking?
So I think you do. That's why it's good to read something together or go through a course together or something, because otherwise it's just two opinions going, at one another. But if, on the other hand, you can actually look at it from a biblical basis together and say, well, what is God's view of this? Because he wants us to be generous because he is first generous with us, right? Mm-hmm. This is an expression of God. To be generous is to conform our lives to God's image. Now, if you have somebody who's not a God follower, who doesn't actually look at this, that's a whole different kettle of fish. We don't actually address that in the book. That is difficult. And you might have to say what part of the money you can actually control so you can be charitable with yours. In general, we have a joint bank account and we like to meld our money. It could be that if you had one couple, both couples are working, you say, well, I'm gonna, we're gonna tithe on my portion. But it's hard.
Yeah, it is. We had one of the first churches I served, a couple, and he was not an angry person. He just didn't believe in Christ, and his wife was a wonderful follower, disciple, just exuberant Christian woman, and they had that very discussion. And she didn't work, she didn't work making money. She worked raising kids and homemaker and teaching Bible studies. She worked, but I remember her talking and said, I went to him and I said, can I have some money to give to, and he was very charitable about it. He goes, sure. And I applauded her, wow, that was courageous of you to do. And she goes, well, I love him and we're married. And, as far as I know, he passed away not ever trusting Christ, but she had this free hand. And I think the Lord honored that even in that marriage. Anyway, I digress again. Let me ask, I think when people see the word stewardship, they might think time, talent, treasure. And what you guys have done is you're playing chess, not just, increase your giving before your standard of living, stay out of debt, invest wisely, 529s for your grandchildren, whatever those things may be. You guys are playing a whole different game about beyond increasing charitable involvement. So talk about that and why that's so important.
Dana and I are kind of like that old rap group, Run DMC, where we can each like go back and forth with sentences. We think so much alike on this.
That's wonderful.
Even though we have some areas of difference, they're far smaller. And writing a book together, by the way, really brings that together, because you got to like synthesize every page. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of like that pie I was talking about. That yes, if you have a pietistic, compartmentalized faith, where God gets a cut of our lives, it's just not a biblical notion. I mean, if it were, then the rich young ruler got a bad rap from Jesus, right? Because he wouldn't give away all of his money, and he went away sad. And Jesus then said how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. The point wasn't that we all have to give away all of our money. The point is we give, in our hearts, we give everything away.
Yeah.
There's nothing we own. There's no part. What does it mean in the Old Testament to say that God is a jealous God? When I first heard that, I'm like, jealous? That seems like a bad word. We're not supposed to be jealous. It means there's no part of our lives that can be off limits to God. So that's also true of our money. There's no part of our money which is off limits to God. Now, that's going to find very different expression with different people. I have friends who can drive luxury cars joyfully, in a faithful obedience to Christ. They've like submitted it to him, and they could do that. I can't do that. We can get a sailboat. Some of my friends couldn't get that. The point is, there's nothing that you say, this is off limits. I'm doing this one way or another. You only get permission from God for whatever you're doing in terms of your money. But the point is, everything we do with our money, including our investing, which is, I think, something that we've ignored for far too long, matters deeply to God. I say to people sometimes when it comes to investing, so if you knew that strip clubs would give you the best return so you could support missionaries, would you invest in strip clubs? And I, of course, say, no, that's ridiculous. Well, how about, abortifacients? How about other things that are disaligned with your faith, and you're not even thinking about it? You're only thinking about risk and rate of return. Mm-hmm. So we want to encourage Christians to start seeing all of their money, all of their resources as needing to align with faith. Dana likes to say, no ill-gotten gains. We don't want to do anything that's not in keeping with God's kingdom.
What was the King James filthy lucre?
Filthy lucre, yeah.
And to that point, Dan, you can pick up on this. You're in a IRA or a 401, there are ETFs, there are large funds. And if you start drilling down, there may well be some areas that you say, I wouldn't prefer that. I use Microsoft products. You might use Apple products. I mean, there's in the world of the world here. So help me a little bit. If it's the Vice stock, sure, maybe not. But how do you really manage it that detailed, Dana?
Well, I think the first part is you don't get fearful and say it's too hard to manage and just completely close your eyes, because there are tools and analytics and advisors that can help you with this. I also wouldn't say try to be a purist from the start. Just try to take some steps to make your investment portfolio more and more aligned with God's heart. And so we had a financial advisor help us go through, and what you can pick through areas that you don't want to be investing in. So that's called a negative screen. And then you can also start building in what you do want to be invested in. And I like to say, what businesses would you like to see in the world? What goods and services do you think contribute to flourishing in the world, and would you like to invest in? And we believe if those are businesses that are bringing flourishing to the world, and not in every case, but in general, God's going to bless those. It does not mean the health and wealth, kind of gospel that right. you put money into this and God's going to, of course, bless this particular company. But I think in general, companies that do things God's way for God's ends are going to contribute to flourishing in the world, contribute to loving people in this world. We don't believe profit is a bad word. I think even Christians kind of have this kind of either or view that nonprofits are good and for-profits are usually bad, and marketplace, just make as much money without thinking about how you're making it so that you can give more money away. Mm-hmm. And we think that the whole spectrum can be used for good, yes. much more powerfully. And the marketplace can scale bigger, can reach more people, and can then eventually do it sustainably so that you're not having to keep giving a nonprofit money. We're not against nonprofits. Nonprofits have their own place within, redemptive kingdom building. But there's a lot of places that business could really move in and do things well and relieve us from having some of the problems in the first place. If you provide good, dignified jobs to people in developing countries, you won't need as much foreign aid in the future.
Wasn't that some of the thinking behind these micro loans? You're giving someone a $20 loan for a sewing machine. Just a sidebar a little bit, and I learned this late. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but Dave Ramsey said something to me years ago that really rocked me. He said, when you give, even to nonprofits or missionaries or churches, you should evaluate them just like an investment. Because there are a lot of, not to be indelicate, ne'er-do-wells in ministry that are not going to use those resources well. And the other umbrage is, and I'm a nonprofit, so hear me clearly, is the only benefit to a nonprofit is the donor. There's no benefit to me as a nonprofit recipient. I don't get any breaks, but you get a break if you donate and get a tax break, which is a whole nother, sidebar, because there's certain thresholds of giving where that doesn't matter anymore, as you well know. You hit those pretty quickly when you start talking about generosity. I have this crazy idea. Health and wealth and prosperity gospel, of course, is a false teaching, right?
Yes.
But yet, when we see people who give generously, it seems almost a truism, God takes care of you. Have you seen this?
We have, and we've seen that that the more you walk in trust with the Lord, the more he will direct your steps, because you're actually listening to him and where those steps should go. So you're willing and able to go through both the fire and to the mountaintops. So I think it's a whole new way and a new gateway to trusting the Lord when you are opening your hands with your money, both your investments and your giving. You have a whole new area to detox from materialism, which is a real problem in the West, obviously. But you also have, you can see more clearly the next steps he wants you to take. And we've found a sense of freedom. I've found a sense of not having to have anxiety or worries about the future because you're not paying as much attention to it, because you see the steps God has for you, and you're not trying to take on the worldly burdens of, I've got to take care of my next 30 years and da-da-da-da. Yes, wise planning, of course, wise planning, wise counsel, prudence, but not in the way the world does it, is fearfully grasping, hoarding, having to take care of ourselves. And we know that doesn't end well.
So the only thing I would add to this, Michael, is it doesn't mean, and I know you're not saying this, that if you go bankrupt, that somehow you have been unfaithful. I've had good, godly Christian friends who have been generous and their businesses went under.
Sure.
And so we want to be careful about not suggesting,
that's helpful. Yeah. This is any more than in the health area. Well, you're sick. Yeah.
You must be kind of disobeying God somewhere. This is the book of Job, right? The Job's comforters, like, well, there's something, it's got to be you because everybody gets their just desserts. It's like, no, in this world, I think what it means to trust God is that even in failure, in loss, in bankruptcy, that if we've done it to God's glory, there's a peace that goes with that. Mm-hmm. That's not what people want to hear. They want to hear, I want to hear about why I'm not going to go bankrupt. To your point, if you're putting first fruits first, that's why they're called first fruits. You're probably paying attention to your finances much more than other people are. And you're probably going to therefore have your finances in better order. So you are less likely to end up in financial trouble. I think that's all true. But we just don't want to make it a formula.
Well, there's no guarantees. Yeah, no, I appreciate that clarification. Yeah, I say that living faithfully puts us in a posture of blessing. It doesn't guarantee us for blessing.
Yeah.
And you and I, we've all lived long enough, friends with cancer, pancreatic cancer, close friend, right? We all lived long enough to know this isn't a quotient, if-then theology. So I appreciate the guardrail. Let me ask sort of a sidebar question here. A lot of folks, when they think about the profit, and I appreciate you bringing that up. Profit is evil. There is this ascetic, Christian nonsense. And I found, and I appreciate your thoughts on this, the people that are most critical of either side of this, it tells me more about them. I had a professor at seminary who said, never evaluate someone else's wealth or materialism. Only look at your own.
Yeah.
That was very freeing for me. But this bigger, better, newer, more, this comparison is the kiss of death of gratitude. These things bombard us in the West. How do we navigate these?
Well, I think you're right. Look at your own self before God, you and your family and whoever's in your sphere of influence. And yeah, I think it's really an individual decision. Now, we can make general assumptions about how maybe our culture might be overspending or using money in inappropriate ways, but I don't think usually we can know somebody else individually is. So I think that removes the judgment. It also can, like you said, comparison is a killer of joy, right?
Just to add to that, it's such an important point, because it says in 1 Timothy 6 that God gives us everything for our enjoyment. Now, if you just took that verse alone, you might say, woohoo, I guess just go out and just have as much fun as possible. There's a lot of other verses, but it's also there. So to your point of this being ascetic or puritanical, or like, we can't go out to nice restaurants anymore, we can't get this car, that's between you and God. Mm-hmm. So I could see somebody living a very high life. I don't know what their finances are. I can have suspicions in my own mind. I can't have judgment.
Yeah.
Judgment is for God, and that's between. Somebody could look at us and say, here you guys are preaching this message of generosity and stewardship, and yet XYZ, what about your lifestyle? It's like, well, we have freedom before God to do that. We don't actually stand before you on that.
Yeah. But I also think it's healthy to allow people, it is healthy to allow people to speak into your life, right? We need people that say and question our lifestyles. Bill and I do that once a year when we do our budget. We think through our lifestyle choices, our spending choices. And I think it's the rightly ordered life, right? Your loves need to be ordered, that everything you're trying to honor God first, then you're trying to love your neighbor, and then you're also taking care of yourself, and it's, and your family in proper order. And if you're doing those in proper order, then it's going to look different for different people.
Sure. Yeah, to the point of judging others, and I'm totally with you. As a pastor teacher for 40-some years, 44 years, whatever, I felt it my job to teach. And the very passage you point out, Bill, and also covetousness, and the comparison is the kiss of death of gratitude. And I got in trouble for that. I had people call me out over the years. I remember one time telling the story of how we increased our giving before our standard of living. And we started out, we were in seminary, very, very much like you guys. We had no money, very inexpensive apartment. Cindy was working at this low-paying job. I was full-time in grad school, working part-time. Praise God, no debt, but hand to mouth. And I went to my pastor and said, we're convicted about not giving. And he said, well, you're in a unique season right now. I wouldn't worry about it. And I went home very disillusioned. And I went home saying, this doesn't feel right, and we had no money. And we started by faith, back to first fruits, Bill, we started giving $50 a month. Now that was a lot of money in our socioeconomic time. But what it taught Cindy and me was, if I give first, I'm saying the Lord is important. It's a faithfulness first, and I'm going to trust Him. It's an act of worship and a statement of faith. Now, it doesn't forgive me for being irresponsible. It doesn't forgive me for being a spendthrift. But it also set for us a course for our 44 years of marriage that, in God's great kindness. And again, I get in trouble saying this. I'm blown away how much we've been able to give and be generous on a pastor's salary. Now, my wife's a realtor. She makes money. But even that, and talk about comparison, you know better than me, that 1%, or what, 0.5% of the world's population is wealthy as we are?
Right. So true. I mean, that's one thing. It's easy for us to look at ourselves and only in our own context. If you're making the median household income of $74,000 a year for your household, you're among the wealthiest in the world, right? Yeah. You look at the charts, it's crazy how wealthy you are. And And we don't have to. And now, does that mean that we're all supposed to live in one-room shacks without running water or something? No, that's not what it means. But the point is, we have to at least contextualize our wealth and
Right.
contextualize our responsibility. If we don't recognize, it says, Jesus said, to him who has been given much, much has been expected. If you don't recognize how much you've been given, you're not going to recognize your corresponding responsibilities.
Right. Good.
So start with, where am I really? And don't tell yourself what I think can be a lie that's self-serving. Well, I'm really poor. Maybe you're not. Maybe you are in the top 10 or 15% wealthiest people in the world. It might mean that you have to change some of your lifestyle. And one of the things that we say that we think is a superpower is just like, was it Socrates, the unexamined life, not worth living? I think we have to have live an examined life with all of our resources. And that starts with keeping track of all of your money.
Why do you think?
Budget. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Why do you think money has such a hold on us? Why do you think it's such a, miserly, controlling, want to get rich? Where does that come from?
I think actually you just said it right on. It's the control issue. So we had friends who we profile in our book who were billionaires, very godly, sold out. Dennis Bakke, he founded a company called AES. And I asked Dennis one day, because we went to church with them. They taught stewardship classes at our church. And they, by the way, had our church to save money. Everybody in the church took
cleaning toilets,
cleaning the bathroom. We've cleaned bathrooms with billionaires. And I asked him, Dennis, what is it that is deceitful about wealth? Because remember when Jesus said the deceitfulness of wealth about in the parable of the sower? And he said, it's the illusion of control. So I think money is, unlike a lot of other sins, and Andy Crouch talks about this as the mammon, which is really a kind of a demonic power. It's really something else where if you can give up that, everything else seems like it comes more easily. In fact, when we go to these conferences, stewardship conferences where people are so surrendered in their wealth, guess what? They seem to be surrendered in every corner of their life as well.
Interesting. Let's go more to the point of your book. I'm having fun just talking about everything, but donor-advised accounts, this impact investing, this is going to apply to a different segment of people, correct? So for those that don't know what a donor-advised account is and haven't heard that nomenclature, Dana, why don't you kind of give us the primer on that?
Sure. So a donor-advised fund is a place like a foundation that you can put your donated capital into. Say you can get your donation tax deduction that year, but it can sit in that donor-advised fund and over years, and you can then direct it over the time. So let's say you had a big bonus this year, end of the year, but you want to get your tax deduction, but you don't want to necessarily have to give it all away and figure out which nonprofits to give to. You can put it in a donor advised fund. It can invest, the money can invest and earn some money, and then you can later direct it. It's called, donor advised, meaning the donor advises where that money goes. Now, the unique part about impact investing is it's not only charitable capital towards nonprofits. You can also use charitable tax-deducted money towards companies, towards businesses that are doing good in the world. And IRS allows that. And so I work for a place called Impact Foundation, where it's a donor-advised fund specifically for people who want to find companies that are also doing good in the world that need equity or debt or some kind of revenue share. You use your charitable capital, you invest in that company, and then when they pay you back, it never comes back to your pocket. It
Right.
remains in the charitable world forever, but it goes back to your endowment, is what I call it, over at a donor advised fund, and you get to redirect it again. And so it's the goose that's laying the golden egg. You can continue to have recycled impact with your charitable capital. And there's a certain kind of joy in catalyzing marketplace ministries, marketplace businesses that can do good in the world, and they can then become sustainable financially on their own. They've grown up and flown off, and they're doing their thing in the world, and now you can use that capital for something else that you want to do in the world.
The extraordinary thing about the endowment world and what you've just articulated is I think most Christians aren't aware of this. we're involved with extraordinary helpful managers here in town in Nashville, and they're big on assets. Get rid of the asset and put it in these funds, because if you got a building to sell or a property you're no longer using, in some other state, that's a wonderful way. And then giving the grandchildren, fingerprints into this process of, this is what your grandma and grandpa built, and you get to advise going forward. And it's a remarkable legacy of thinking far beyond just writing the check to your local church or to a missionary, which is wonderful. But and let me ask you this, because some of our audience now is going, well, I don't have that kind of money. I could never do that. So help them out with that threshold, if you will. How does that look?
No, there's no, it takes 5 minutes to set this up. If you go to we're at National Christian Foundation, Donor Advised Fund. It'll take you a good 5 minutes to set it up. That's it. And then, is there an issue with, but there's not a minimum to set that up.
That was my question. There was a time, was there not? I think there was a time your donor advised account had to be a certain amount to sustain the account.
Does it have to be?
With NCF, I'm not sure, but also there are fees associated.
Sure.
Yeah, and you'd want to make sure those fees make sense for you. But yes, you can do all kinds of very smart tax harvesting so that you can even be increasing your generosity even more. But I would say for impact investing through Impact Foundation, there is a typical minimum of $25,000. So playing in that space is maybe
it's a little different.
Yeah, it is different.
Mm-hmm. But that, even for the $75,000 a year average income, they might get an inheritance one day. Mm-hmm. They might get $200,000 from an uncle or from a parent, and they go, "What do we do with that?" Well, why don't we do something creative that has legs, as opposed to just spending it or just giving it away? That's kind of my point. Interesting.
By the way, I looked it up while we were talking. I don't think there is any minimum for National Christian Foundation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks that don't know what that is, essentially think of a catalog of nonprofits, and you're putting your money, as Dana said, in this pond. And you do it annually. You can contribute to it, but you get your tax break then. And then you can cut checks out of it, if you will. And one of the selfish parts of those that we liked, I don't get 18 donor requests from organizations that we're supporting, because it goes through your donor advised account anyway.
You also get one receipt.
Yeah.
So you're not having gathering all these receipts for,
Exactly. Tell us some stories, and I loved reading through some of these. There were two or three that I was going to bring up, but Amy, is it Minich and Suzanne Daniels' story? These had to be delightful as you met these folks along the way and saw what they're doing. Why don't each of you pick one of the 24 that was especially joyful or meaningful for you to learn from?
Boy, there are so many, because they were... Okay, I'll take Scott Friesen. So Scott Friesen, very successful businessman. He had dreams as a child to be a millionaire by 30. I think he became there by 40. He didn't need to work anymore. He had 3 businesses that he founded and sold. And he thought he'd retire, and he's a Christian. He thought he'd retire to a life of leisure and then kind of giving out money, on a professional philanthropist. And the Lord said to him, "Work so that others might live." So Scott has taken all of his business acumen, and he's now started multiple businesses in Africa that are creating jobs for the poor, that are run according to Christian principles, that are giving a return on investment for the investors along the way. And he's bringing wealth and capital and joy and flourishing to a people who have a lot of trouble getting capital. If you're an entrepreneur in Africa and you want to start a business, good luck, right? It is so hard for you to do. And so Scott used all of that, and he could be a guy who's a professional semi-pro golfer right now. I'm just making that up, nothing wrong with semi-pro golfers. He could be just living a life of ease, and instead he's using what God has given him to bless others.
Love it. Dana, one that comes to mind?
Well, I'll pick up on that, because we had Scott at our dinner table, and when he said God told him, work so that others might live. I said, what an amazing tagline. I was jealous of his life tagline. I'm like, I want that kind of work, that your work could help others literally live. And I thought, so I'll pick up on the story of David Sims, who's in our book, who's worked in microfinance and throughout his life with Opportunity International, which is one of the big Christian microfinance organizations. And again, he was, and I was involved in that too through foreign aid, helping others to live. But he's also seen that providing jobs within the middle market, or what they call the missing middle, of companies that can generate more jobs than just maybe one or two micro jobs, is what's really going to lift these economies off. That's how the United States and Western economies actually pulled their people out of poverty. And so David went on to then form Talenton. And Talenton is an investment fund that looks for these middle market companies in Africa that are going to grow and scale, but they need this maybe some market. It's not fully market rate, but close to market rate investments, but it's more risky. But to me, it's like, by being involved in those kind of companies, I do feel like I'm working so that others may live. Now it's, several rungs removed, but I believe I'll meet those people in heaven, and they'll say, you know that your investment helped me get a good job, and then I was able to pay my kids' school fees, and we got ourselves out of poverty. We started our own business. And, those are the kind of joyful reunions we'll see in heaven. And so that's why I went to Impact Foundation. Amy Minnick created a place called Impact Foundation, where I can help people to work so that others work and use the capital they've developed through their work to help others to live.
We've known a number of families that have, let's say, cashed in the States to go do something abroad. One is a dentist, and that's a service. It's not going to be this type of investment, but it's always been admirable to me that someone says, what we do. I have a friend that has gone to Haiti every year for many, many years, and he's a surgeon, and he says there's no lawsuits. People are happy for you to help them with a broken arm, broken leg, sometimes a limb removal. They're joyful. They don't complain. And what we so take for granted in the West, in some ways, is so much easier abroad, and people that don't have those, whether it's business or investments or medicine or whatever your profession might be, if you want to use avocation, your calling might be to serve the body of Christ in a greater way. But again, I think what you guys, at least from my experience in teaching stewardship and all the things we aforementioned, you guys have taken this another chessboard down, thinking about investments, recurring revenues, how to be almost self-perpetuating in a way. Is that fair to say?
It is, and I want to challenge your listeners on one other thing, Michael. So lots of people around our age now are starting to retire.
Yes.
And what are you saying when you say you were going to retire? I have enough. I can live out my days. I've got enough. What if you didn't retire? What if you just decided, I'm going to work for one more year, and everything I earn this year, after taxes, I will give away? And the reason we like this challenge is we have a suspicion that if you do that 1 year, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that was so awesome to cut a check for $50,000 for XYZ. I think I can work one more year, because it's not like, that's not crazy. We have friends who are teachers who can retire. Anybody can do this. It's not like in America, lots of people retire at this time, but why do you have to retire? Now, you might just go to a life of service. That's wonderful. But you could also think of your job, which is what we should look at it as, life of service, and think of everything you're earning is now going to others.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny you bring that up, retirement. Howard Hendricks was one of my professors and mentors, and he said, what are you going to do? He said, you're going to retire and play golf, and I won't try to mimic him, but he would say, you're going to go to Sarasota and blow out your aorta, and so many of my peers, and they come to me, I'm 67, and they come to me, and the purpose question is haunting. Because even when you have grandchildren and play golf and maybe have a cabin or whatever, which is in God's kindness, we talked about, you might drive a 98 Toyota, I might drive a 2014 pickup. It doesn't matter. The point is, you got to find some kind of purpose beyond travel and grandchildren. And there is I think some guys are delaying retirement, Bill and Dana, because they don't know what that looks like. And the other illusion that, again, Dave Ramsey taught me 10 years ago, he said, guys that want to give back, they should have never retired for this very reason, because you have this huge capital engine when you're at those retiring years, and you can be more generous.
Exactly.
Why go to the same job volunteering with less productivity, less clout, less ability to get things done as a volunteer, when as a earning a person? And there's lots of ways you can cut it, but that was there on my heels going, yeah, this idea of giving back is kind of silly. Now, not to denigrate it, but I mean, I'm glad for big brothers and people that go tutor and ESL classes, wonderful. But I think to your point, it's a more, it's a stewardship question. What could you do better with what God's given you, right?
I feel called to work for pay until somebody says to me, you really shouldn't be working anymore.
Dana might be the one, Bill. It's about time. Well, it's an interesting challenge, and I appreciate so much what you guys have done, and pray God will continue to use it. One thing I do like to ask, they've heard me ask some questions, maybe relevant or not. Each of you give me one thing a person ought to do who's listened to this. One thing they ought to do.
I'd start with keep track of your expenses, because it brings you into reality. And just start there, and then
budget.
But even more than, because budgeting is about projecting for the future, which can lie. Budgets lie. Keeping track of your records, if you're accurate, they don't lie.
When we talk of budgeting, we say you track every dollar for months and months and months, and look, as again, Financial Peace says, every dollar has a name.
Exactly.
Where's it going?
Exactly.
Is it going to cable? Is it going to your phones, your tablets, your watch? And that is the sobering thing when you see where you're spending it. I'm sorry. The one thing was
And then
continue.
Bring that up to God, and live in light of that to God, and say, you want me, anything I should change here, Lord?
Dana, how about you? One thing.
Yeah, I would say then also be transparent with at least one other accountability partner. It can be quite embarrassing to show people how you spend your money.
Yep.
It's kind of like showing people all the TV shows you watch. It's like, you want to have people know and be I would say, so I would also encourage you going through a journey of generosity. Contact Generous Giving. You can do it online. Sometimes they have them in your area, but it's a focused community time to think through, what does generosity look like given the heart of Christ being generous. And it's a free program. It's wonderful. I particularly think it's a great gift for newlyweds. Before you lock in your lifestyle choices, start off right so that you don't have to undo all the debt or mistakes. Start off right with, I would say, premarital counseling and finances.
Well, we've worked for years with young married couples trying to get them on track to avoiding debt and living under your income and giving first, and all these. Again, you and I probably not too dissimilar. That was who we were. This idea of credit card debt and car payments was terrifying to us, and I think that's been lost on a generation. But what you guys are doing is such a great contribution. So the book is called Stewards Not Owners: The Joy of Aligning Your Money with Your Faith, by Bill and Dana Wichterman. And the book comes out March 11th. You can pre-order, I'm sure, anywhere you order a book online. I want to highly encourage you to get a hold of this. And again, in the show notes, we'll have links to some of the things we've talked about, the generous giving, the donor advised accounts, things like National Christian Foundation. We'll put those links below, because if you're new to this whole area of stewardship beyond just time, talent, and treasure, you're going to need some help. And I would just add one thing is just start small. Start with something, whether it's a budget, looking where you're spending your money, doing some of these programs where you look at your subscriptions. What do you subscribe to? How many things you've forgotten about? And it's a healthy thing periodically to kind of clean through the cupboards. Say, where's our money going, right?
Absolutely. That's great.
And
Good
Michael,
count.
thank you for encouraging people to apply a biblical worldview for everything they do. It's that examine life, letting
Yeah.
the Bible and God's word really seep into everything we do. It makes it so much more joyful, so much more impactful, so meaningful. So thank you for your
Well,
ministry.
and back to your comment about joy, I'm kind of the same way. I'm kind of Eeyore at heart. And so it takes a bit for me to find, that's why I differentiate joy and happiness so much, because I'm not by nature a joyful person. But when I'm living faithfully, I'm humbly, I'm confessing my sin, I'm keeping short accounts, there is a joy that's pretty hard to define. But it's a peace that surpasses comprehension. It's a contentment. The comparison goes away a little bit. The materialism loses its hold on me a little bit, and I think those are all signs of God working in our lives, right? So it's a great place to be, as opposed to the consumerism and distractions and treadmills and fear, and all the pressures we all face.
Amen.
Anyway, God bless you guys again. Thanks for coming on the program, and we look forward to see how God uses this great resource.
Thank you,
Thank
Michael.
you, Michael.